What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over several tips to hopefully help you play better and win more in Fortnite's Blitz Royale game mode. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of Blitz Royale, and if you guys would like to use my code in the item shop, it is EvolveJake, and it is underneath the webcam at all times. So the first thing I think you really want to pay attention to in Blitz mode is going to be what your starting item is and what your starting medallion is, because these will change game to game, but everybody in the game has the same starting medallion and the same starting item. So this week, for example, we have the Bad Bosses update. If you know that you're starting with the Hades chains and everybody else is also starting with the Hades chains, that might impact where you want to land and how you want to play in the early game, because you know everybody is going to have the Hades chains. That's going to make really chaotic situations, especially if you have like 5 people all landing at the same house with it, right? And then the same could be said of medallions. There's certain medallions that don't really impact the game too much, like the Ringmaster Scar medallion giving you unlimited ammo. It's nice, but it doesn't really matter too much for a mode like Blitz. On the other hand, the core medallion, which makes you invisible when you sprint jump and also improves your sprint jump, that's going to change pretty much every fight you play for that entire match, because everybody's going to be jumping around invisible, and you want to go into every fight knowing that everybody is going to be doing this, and that way you aren't more like caught off guard by it. So just quickly, you know, take into account what the starting medallion is and what the starting item is for that game, and maybe adjust accordingly. Another thing to keep in mind with Blitz Royale is that this mode has mostly AI in it. There's sometimes only one other real player or one other real team in the game with you. Sometimes there's a bit more, but every Blitz Royale match is majority AI. And the reason why this matters is not only is it going to make winning in this mode much easier, but you need to keep this in mind when you're playing and when you're fighting. Because if you're fighting players that are obvious AI, sure, you can eliminate them, but keep in the back of your head that like that fight doesn't matter too much, and you don't want to put too much effort into it, and you don't want to put too much attention into it. You should be able to defeat the AI players on autopilot, basically, while paying more attention to your surroundings and getting prepared for, you know, a potential third party from the actual team. So just, I know it's like kind of weird to say, just keep in mind that this mode is mostly AI, but just every fight you get into, you kind of want to quickly identify whether or not it's an AI team or a real team, and then adjust accordingly. Another thing that's very different about this mode compared to the regular game is that the zone moves incredibly fast. Blitz Royale matches are only about 5 minutes long, and so you need to do your early game looting very quick, potentially not loot as much in the early game, and be prepared to go to zone, because you don't want to just be left like running in the storm all game in a Blitz Royale match. That's not really fun, and that's not really going to set you up for success. So be prepared to leave quickly and not dedicate as much time to looting in the early game as you would in a mode like Battle Royale. From the moment you get on the map, you need to kind of be active and be doing things, because you don't really have much time to just chill in Blitz Royale. There are 2 things that I think you really want to learn the locations of, and kind of the areas you like landing or the areas you like playing around. And that is going to be the God chests and the rifts. So there's these special chests, which are like the elemental chests, I believe, from Chapter 6, Season 1. But each of these you open will give you a high rarity weapon. It will give you a boon, which could potentially be pretty impactful for how your game plays. And I believe they also always give you a legendary healing item, which is going to be great because you can get the Chug Jug and you can get Slurp Juice this way, which are 2 of the best healing items in the game. So these God chests are really helpful, and each kind of area and each POI has several. So just kind of making note of where these are, they spawn in the same locations every game, can definitely help you play, not necessarily play better, but get an advantage in that match, especially if you need heals. Another thing that can really help you are going to be the rifts around the map. These are permanent, and I believe they spawn in the same locations every game. And just making use of these rifts will help you deal with the faster zones, but it'll also help you travel the map much faster, kind of have less downtime in between looting your, you know, spawn POI and finding more players to fight. And it'll also help you get to the llamas and the supply drops faster, which we'll get to in a moment. Shield bubbles are incredibly helpful in this mode. If you've played Blitz Royale for any amount of time, I'm sure you've seen a lot of players using shield bubbles, and I would highly, 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 highly recommend carrying shield bubbles in this game mode. They're one of the few things that can just like prevent you from just auto losing to bad timing or bad positioning. And in a game mode that plays as fast as Blitz Royale, there's going to be times where you just get caught off guard by an enemy team, or you get third-partied by an enemy team, or a fight happens kind of under unfortunate circumstances, and just having the immediate reaction to throw a shield bubble down in those situations can save your life in a lot of fights, and just, like I said, prevent you from just auto losing to unfortunate timing. When I'm just traveling the map, not actively in a fight, I like to just kind of walk around with my shield bubbles out. That way they're just already ready to throw. You often don't have mobility in this game mode, and so shield bubbles are the next best thing. And they help a lot in close range fights as well. And so I can't stress how important I think shield bubbles are in this game mode. Kind of touched on this earlier with the rifts, but the supply drops and the llamas that spawn throughout the course of the game are incredibly helpful in Blitz Royale. And they actually will be marked when they spawn. Both the supply drops and the llamas have high rarity loot and high rarity heals, but they also have a chance for mobility items, which is huge because there isn't much mobility in this game mode typically. And they also have items that aren't really typically in the regular loot pool. Like you can get the shockwave hammer, you can get the shockwave launcher. The kinetic blade is in there, although the kinetic blade is currently a starter item for the bad bosses week. But even prior to the bad bosses week, the kinetic blade was in these llamas and in the supply drops, and having that mobility in a mode where not very many people have mobility is great. In addition to, like I said, the high rarity weapons, the heals. The supply drops can also give you a random medallion, which is incredibly impactful. I said everybody starts with a medallion, which is great. Everyone has the same advantage, so you're kind of on the same playing field. But let's just say you had the machinist medallion to start the game, and that's the one everyone has this match. If you go to a drop and get the Shogun X medallion, which will make you invisible and have unlimited sprint, you have a huge advantage on everybody else in the lobby. If you get the Cerberus medallion for the dashes, you have a huge advantage on everyone else in the lobby. Megalodon medallion. There's several medallions throughout the course of the game that you can get out of these supply drops that I think increase your odds of winning much more than just like getting a higher rarity weapon would, because you have abilities that are different than other people and you could really flex that to your advantage. So I cannot stress how important I think these supply drops are. And you often will have to fight over these because other teams will go for it as well. If you're fast to get them, maybe not. But even if you do have to fight for them, I think the rewards are worth it as long as you're, confident fighting. I would highly recommend going for these supply drops. And I kind of touched on earlier how it's mostly AI in this game mode, right? If you go to a supply drop and eliminate one of the real teams and then also get that loot, you've made the game much easier for yourself because there's only a handful of real teams as is. Third parties are going to be really prevalent in this game mode. That's just kind of the nature of the game. Every battle royale mode has third parties, but you put people on a smaller map, you make the game play out faster. Third parties are going to be even more prevalent. And this is just something you have to, always be prepared for. And this is one of the reasons why I was saying bubbles were so good, because, you might finish a fight and be okay. You're getting third partied, you need to throw those bubbles down. Mobility would also be good, but you can't always have it in this game mode. Just either way, be prepared to get third partied and be prepared to deal with third parties. This is why I kind of touched on the fact that when you're fighting these AI teams, you want to do it quickly, but you don't want to just invest so much of your attention into it. You need to be prepared for the third parties. And every time you're fighting, you kind of need to be thinking about where you're going to be getting third partied from or where enemy players are likely to be coming from. With how small the map is, I feel like a lot of these matches play out in a similar way, and you can kind of get used to where the hot areas on the map typically are. But just know you're going to get third partied in this game mode every time you fight. That needs to be in the back of your mind. That's always true in every battle royale mode, but I think in this Blitz mode, it's even more true. With Blitz, you get Blitz levels throughout the course of the game as you survive storm circles and as you eliminate enemies. You basically level up and you unlock new rewards for yourself. And a lot of these times you will be given weapons or items from Fortnite's past. A lot of these will be like past mythic or past exotic weapons. I think it's best to somewhat try to familiarize yourself with these different rewards if you didn't play back then, because you really don't want to be thinking about it at all. Like I said, this game plays out very quickly and there's a lot of third parties and zone moves quick. If you get like a Midas drum gun and then you kind of have to sit there and drop your main weapon and shoot the drum gun and kind of think about whether or not you want to use it, that is incredibly detrimental to you. I think just regardless of which weapon you're using, not doing that would be better than doing that. So just try to know kind of which of these weapons that you actually enjoy using. That way you don't have to think about it as much in the heat of the moment. I don't really care for using any of the drum guns in this game mode. And so whenever I get the drum gun, I don't have to think about, do I want to use this or do I don't want to use this? I just don't use it. The main kind of exotics I want are the heisted accelerant shotgun. That one is incredible. The exotic pump, or the exotic sentinel pump, I'll definitely use. The mythic sky scar I'll sometimes use, but it kind of depends on the stage of the game I'm in. The ocean's burst AR I kind of like. But either way, if you know what these weapons do and learn what they do, you won't have to think about it as much in the heat of the moment. And I think that will make it much easier for you to just have an easier time playing the game. And another thing I think you don't want to be worrying about too much is looting kind of in the later stages of the game. And what I mean by this is if you wipe a team, especially if it's a bot team, as we talked about before, I don't think you want to be putting as much attention into like picking through their loot and kind of going item by item and evaluating what they have and if you want that, because of how fast the game mode is and how prevalent third parties are. All of it kind of goes back to that. And so oftentimes in the end game, I often won't even really consider the enemy loot. If I have like a purple AR and a purple shotgun, sure, the gold versions would be nice, but having better timing on a fight and not being caught off guard by a third party matters more to me than like one rarity upgrade on AR or shotgun. So throughout the course of the game, kind of know what you have and what you're looking for. If you already have a gold AR, then you don't really need to consider what ARs the enemies have. If you have a low rarity shotgun, then sure, maybe you want to be looking for that in the enemy loot. But just knowing what you could benefit before you even start looking at loot, I think will really benefit you to just get done doing that quickly and not have other players capitalize on your bad timing as much. Having mobility in this game mode is a huge advantage because there isn't that much of it in the general loot pool. This week is different. As of the time I'm recording this, it's the bad bosses week. So there will be games where you start with the kinetic blade and everybody has mobility, and that's great, right? But in most matches where you don't start with one of those mobility items, it's kind of scarce. I feel like crash pads are one of the only mobility items in the core loot pool, and that's a huge advantage to have somebody have them on your team because mobility is so limited. But this also makes the supply drops and the llamas much more valuable because those are going to be one of your main sources of mobility. And when you have more mobility, you're going to be able to, not only travel the map faster, which is great, but it helps you reset bad fights. It helps you get away from third parties. It helps you get away from bad timing, but it also helps you push in third party other players, which is going to make the game much easier for you. So whenever you are able to get these mobility items, I would highly suggest taking it, even if it isn't a mobility item that you would typically rate very highly, like crash pads. One tip that I've always had for Fortnite, regardless of game mode, is that you don't want to be scared when fighting other players, and you don't want to fall into this playstyle of always playing very passive and always playing very scared. But this is true to an even greater degree because of the way Blitz is. Matches are like 5 minutes long tops. I've had games that end in like 3 minutes, 20 seconds, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. Like the games can go very quick. And so if you fall into this playstyle of always playing very passive and always playing very scared and always avoiding fighting, not only are you, in my opinion, probably playing in a way that isn't nearly as much fun, but you're making the game harder for yourself because you're going to be hesitating more in fights and you're not going to be as comfortable fighting. The penalty for losing in Blitz is incredibly insignificant because of the pacing of the game. And so I would highly suggest, if you are someone who plays very passive, try to kind of get out of that shell, force more fights, get confident fighting, and the game will be much easier to win in the long run. You might lose more games today if you start playing aggressive, but if you build that habit and you build that playstyle, weeks from now, you'll be winning so many more games consistently and playing much better than you currently are. Another thing that goes back and is valuable in every game mode is going to be to keep track of how many players are alive. I think this matters more in Blitz because of how fast the games are. There's often times where I'm going into the final fight and I don't even realize it's the final fight because of how fast the games go. So just try to kind of keep somewhat note of this. Because the pacing of the game is so different, it might be a 2v2 to decide the game before you even realize, and that could definitely change how you play the game, especially when you know you aren't really likely to get third-partied because that is the last team or the last player. The flip side, if it's a 2v2v2 in duos and you know the other two teams are fighting, obviously that's a situation where you want a third party because that's going to win you the game. But if you didn't realize those were the final teams actively fighting, you might not put as much emphasis on, third partying it. So try to just kind of pay attention to that throughout the course of the game and like earlier on in the game than you normally would. I feel like when you play Battle Royale, you're kind of used to knowing when the game is, in the late game, and you start paying attention to that somewhat. Blitz, you got to be doing that much sooner, about like a minute or two into the game. It's basically over. And the final thing is just going to be to keep track of what the weekly updates are. So far for Blitz, I don't know if this is going to continue forever and ever, but there's been a different weekly update. So this week we have the Bad Bosses update, where you have potential to start with the Kinetic Blade, the Hades Chains, the Void Mask, or the Fire Mask. The week prior was the Avatar week. I think one of the next weeks is going to be some sort of anime stuff. But either way, the loot pool changes week to week. And so just knowing what that week's loot pool is can definitely help you play a bit better when you do end up starting with those items. Or at least try to familiarize yourself with what the items do for each week when the update happens. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like some more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.